That cold morning, no one expected an act of compassion to change everything. What started as another quiet day near the reserve became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, every roar and every breath matters, because behind every white tiger there is a story worth saving. The frost clung to the chain-link fence like a fragile promise, the kind that breaks under the weight of winter's indifference. It was day 365 since Raja had last made a sound. The white tiger paced the shadowed edge of his enclosure at the edge of Willow Creek Wildlife Sanctuary, his massive form a ghost against the barren oaks. His fur, once a radiant cascade of snow and shadow, now hung dull, matted from the relentless damp that seeped through the reserve's underfunded barriers. No roar shattered the silence. No growl warned off the crows that perched on the wire above. Just the soft crunch of his paws on frozen earth, a rhythm as steady and unyielding as the ticking of a clock no one bothered to wind. Elias Thorne, the sanctuary's lone ranger, watched from the warmth of his truck cab, steam rising from his coffee mug like a sigh. He'd been here since the beginning, back when Raja arrived as a confiscated cub from a roadside zoo, his eyes wide with the terror of a world that had already betrayed him. That was over a decade ago, but the last year, it had carved something deeper into the tiger's soul. A poacher's trap had snapped shut on his leg during an escape attempt, shattering bone and spirit alike. The surgery saved his life, but the pain lingered in every hesitant step, turning the once mighty beast into a shadow of silence. Elias had named him Raja after the old tales of jungle kings, but now the name felt like a whisper lost in the wind. The sanctuary sprawled across the outskirts of Willow Creek, a forgotten town where empty highways stretched like veins toward nowhere. Diesel engines rumbled faintly in the distance, semis hauling freight through the pre-dawn chill, their headlights slicing the fog like accusations. The air smelled of pine resin and exhaust, undercut by the metallic tang of frost-bitten grass. Elias rubbed his calloused hands together, the lines on his face deepening as he scanned the horizon. He'd seen too many animals come and go, bears with bullet wounds, eagles with clipped wings. But Raja was different. The white tiger's rarity made him a symbol, a living emblem of what the world was losing, one indifferent decision at a time. Inside the ranger station, a squat cabin with peeling paint and a wood stove that never quite warmed the corners, Dr. Lena Hargrove sipped her tea and reviewed the logs. The veterinarian had driven in from the city 2 years back, drawn by the sanctuary's plea for volunteers after budget cuts gutted the staff. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and steady-handed, but her moral compass had been tested long before Willow Creek. "He's not eating again," she murmured to herself, flipping through the notes. Raja's portions sat untouched in the feeder, the raw venison congealing under a thin layer of ice. The other handlers, Tom, the burly groundskeeper with a laugh like gravel, and young Mia, the intern fresh from college, had their theories. Tom called it the wild wearing off, a pragmatic shrug to the tiger's withdrawal. Mia whispered about depression, her voice soft with the idealism of someone who still believed animals could heal if humans just tried harder. Lena knew better. Silence like Raja's wasn't surrender. It was a judgment, heavy as the snow that blanketed the hills. That morning, as the first grey light bled into the sky, something shifted. Elias stepped out of his truck, boots crunching on the gravel path that wound toward the enclosures. The wind carried a faint, unfamiliar mewl, a sound so small it could have been the rustle of leaves. He paused, breath fogging the air, his heart quickening in the way it did when instinct overrode routine. The sanctuary's outer gate, usually locked tight, hung slightly ajar, a gap no wider than a fist. Had a fox nosed it open, or something else? He followed the sound, his flashlight beam cutting through the mist. There, huddled against the base of Raja's fence, was a tiny form, a kitten, no bigger than his palm, its fur a mottled grey streaked with mud. Its sides heaved with shallow breaths, eyes squeezed shut against the cold, abandoned perhaps, or lost from one of the farm cats that roamed the town's edges. Elias knelt slowly, the gravel biting into his knees, and extended a gloved hand. The kitten's mewl grew fainter, a plea swallowed by the wind. Compassion tugged at him, unbidden and sharp. He'd lost his own child years ago, a daughter, taken by illness before she could walk, and moments like this always unearthed that old ache, raw as an open wound. But it was what happened next that froze him in place. From the shadows of the enclosure, Raja emerged, not with a charge or a snarl, but with a stillness that commanded the air itself, his amber eyes, dulled by months of quiet suffering, fixed on the kitten. The tiger's breath came in visible puffs, laboured from the old injury, his white coat stark against the dimness. He lowered his massive head to the fence, nostrils flaring at the scent of the tiny creature. Elias held his breath, the world narrowing to the space between man, tiger, and the shivering form on the ground. Raja didn't roar. He didn't retreat. Instead, he pressed his paw, broad and scarred, against the chain link, as if testing the barrier between worlds. The kitten stirred, its weak cry echoing in the silence, and in that instant, something unspoken passed between them. The tiger's eyes softened, a flicker of instinct breaking through the veil of his year-long hush. Elias's hand trembled as he reached for the kitten, the cold seeping deeper into his bones. "Easy now," he whispered, more to himself than the animals. The rescuer in him warred with the fear. White tigers weren't pets. They were forces of nature, wild even in captivity. Yet here was Raja, silent sentinel, his presence a quiet demand for mercy. Lena arrived minutes later, her truck skidding to a halt on the icy drive. She saw the scene and stopped short, her breath hitching. "What is it?" she asked, voice low, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile tableau. Elias cradled the kitten now, its body limp but warm against his chest. "Found it here, and him. He's watching." Raja hadn't moved, his paw still against the fence, eyes locked on the bundle in Elias's arms. In the sanctuary's dim light, as the sun crested the hills and painted the frost in gold, the first crack appeared in Raja's silence. Not a roar, but a low rumble, deep in his chest, like thunder held back. The kitten stirred in Elias's grasp, nestling closer, and for the first time in 365 days, the white tiger extended his trust. It was a small act, born of desperation and instinct, but it forced the humans to confront their own, to see not a beast, but a soul reaching across the divide. The morning unfolded slowly, the air thick with unspoken questions. Who would bridge the gap? And what hidden truths lay waiting in the tiger's watchful gaze? The sun climbed higher, but its light did little to chase the chill from the sanctuary grounds. Elias stood frozen for a moment longer, the kitten's fragile warmth seeping through his glove like a fragile thread, connecting him to something alive and pleading. Raja's rumble lingered in the air, a vibration that hummed through the chain-link fence and into Elias's chest, stirring memories he'd long buried under layers of routine and regret. The tiger's amber eyes held steady, not with the feral hunger of a predator, but with a quiet vigilance, as if the massive creature had been waiting for this interruption to his solitude, a chance to remember what it meant to protect. Lena approached cautiously, her boots soft on the gravel, the steam from her breath mingling with the mist that still clung to the oaks. She didn't speak at first. Words felt too heavy in the presence of such raw instinct. Instead, she knelt beside Elias, her veterinarian's kit slung over one shoulder, and gently peeled back the edge of his glove to assess the kitten. Its ribs were sharp under the thin fur, each breath a shallow rasp that cut through the morning's hush. "Hypothermic," she murmured finally. her voice steady but laced with the weight of decisions yet to be made. "We need to get it inside, warm it up. But him—" She glanced at Raja, whose paw remained pressed against the fence, the scarred pads unyielding. The tiger's white coat caught the light now, revealing the faint tremors in his frame, not from cold, but from the effort of holding back the pain that had silenced him for so long. Elias nodded, rising slowly with the kitten cradled against his jacket. The sanctuary's paths wound like veins through the frost-kissed earth, leading back to the ranger station, where the wood stove flickered like a hesitant heartbeat. Tom was already there, hauling feed sacks from the shed, his broad shoulders hunched against the wind. He paused when he saw them, his gravelly laugh absent for once. "What's that you've got?" he asked, wiping his hands on his overalls, eyes narrowing at the bundle. Mia followed close behind, her intern's notebook clutched like a shield, her face paling as she spotted Raja's enclosure in the distance. The tiger hadn't followed their movement with his eyes. Instead, he paced a slow circle, his limp more pronounced now, the old injury pulling at him like an anchor. Inside the station, the air was thick with the scent of pine smoke and damp wool. Lena cleared a space on the worn oak table, spreading a clean towel and setting up a heating pad scavenged from the supply closet. Elias laid the kitten down gently, its tiny body curling instinctively toward the warmth. The creature's eyes fluttered open for the first time, milky blue, unfocused, but alive with a spark that made Lena's hands pause mid-motion. She injected a saline drip, her fingers steady despite the tremor she felt deep in her core. Years ago, in the city's bustling clinics, she'd treated pets with owners who demanded miracles. But out here, in Willow Creek's forgotten corners, miracles were earned through sweat and silence. This kitten, though, wasn't just any stray. Its arrival at Raja's fence felt like a message, one the white tiger had received before any human could. Tom leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his moral stance as unyielding as the frost outside. "Cute, but we've got enough mouths to feed without adding strays," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "That tiger's the priority. He's been wasting away, and now this. Coincidence, maybe, but I say we call animal control. Let them handle the kitten." His words hung in the air, a pragmatic wall against the pull of compassion. Mia shot him a glance, her idealism flaring. "It's not just a stray. Look at where it was, right by Raja. Maybe he needs it, like company or something." She hovered near the table, her breath hitching as the kitten let out a faint mew, its paw twitching toward the sound of her voice. Elias said nothing at first, his gaze drifting to the window where Raja's form was visible through the mist, a white silhouette against the barren trees. The tiger had stopped pacing and now sat, head lowered, watching the station with an intensity that bordered on plea. Elias's mind flashed to his daughter, Sophie, her tiny hand reaching for him in those final days, her breaths growing weaker until silence claimed her. He'd been too late then, bound by hospital rules and his own helplessness. Here, though, the choice was his. "No animal control," he said quietly, the words breaking the tension like a crack in ice. "We'll see to it, both of them." Lena nodded, her sharp eyes softening as she monitored the kitten's vitals. The little creature stabilized slowly, its chest rising more evenly under the blanket she'd fashioned from an old flannel shirt. But the real test came when she suggested bringing it closer to Raja, not inside the enclosure, but near enough for the tiger to sense its presence. "He hasn't responded to anything in months," she explained, her voice low. "But this, it might reach him." Tom grumbled, muttering about risks and protocols, but he didn't argue when Elias carried the warming bundle back outside. The wind had picked up, carrying the distant hum of highway traffic, a reminder of the world beyond Willow Creek that cared little for silent tigers or lost kittens. They approached the fence with measured steps, the gravel crunching underfoot like whispered warnings. Raja rose as they neared, his massive body unfolding with a grace that belied his pain. His breath came in visible clouds, labored but determined, and for the first time Elias saw the depth of the tiger's suffering, not just the limp, but the isolation etched into every line of his form. The white fur, so rare and majestic, seemed almost translucent in the pale light, a vulnerability that twisted something in Elias's gut. He knelt again, placing the kitten in a shallow box just beyond the fence, close enough for scents to mingle. Raja's nostrils flared, drawing in the faint, milky aroma. The tiger extended his paw once more, pressing it flat against the wire, and this time a low chuff escaped him. Not a roar, but a sound of recognition, deep and resonant. The kitten stirred, its head turning toward the fence, and in that shared silence a bond flickered to life. Mia's eyes welled with unshed tears, her hand covering her mouth as she watched. Lena stood back, her own breath catching. She'd seen animals connect before, but this felt like instinct reclaiming what pain had stolen. As the morning wore on, the group lingered, the air thick with the unspoken. Tom shifted uncomfortably, his fear of the tiger's wildness clashing with the scene unfolding. "He's still dangerous," he said finally, voice rough. "One wrong move." But Elias ignored him, his focus on Raja's eyes, where a hidden spark gleamed, the first sign that the white tiger's silence might be breaking, not from force, but from this tiny act of trust. The kitten settled, its body relaxing as if sensing the guardian beyond the fence. In that moment, the sanctuary felt less like a cage and more like a crossroads, where human hesitation met animal resilience. Yet tension simmered beneath the calm. Raja's old wound throbbed visibly now, his paw trembling against the fence, and Lena's mind raced to the medical crisis ahead. Field treatment wouldn't suffice. The tiger needed intervention, but getting close meant risking everything. Elias felt the weight of it all, the moral suspense coiling tighter. Who among them would step forward, trembling hands and all, to bridge the divide? The highway's distant rumble echoed like a countdown, and in Raja's watchful gaze, the promise of revelation hung heavy, waiting to unfold. The frost began to thaw under the midday sun, turning the sanctuary paths into slick mirrors that reflected the barren oaks like fractured memories. Elias lingered by the fence, his knees protesting as he crouched with the box cradled in his arms, the kitten's faint warmth a counterpoint to the chill seeping through his jacket. Raja's paw remained pressed against the chain link, the scarred pads unyielding, but now a subtle shift rippled through the tiger's frame, a tension easing like breath released after too long held. The white fur caught flecks of sunlight, transforming the dull matting into something almost ethereal, a reminder of the majesty hidden beneath layers of suffering. Elias's own breath hitched, the old ache in his chest surfacing again, sharp as the gravel under his boots. Sophie's face flickered in his mind, her tiny fingers curling around his thumb in those final hospital hours, her silence a void he'd never filled. Here, though, silence spoke volumes, bridging the gap between man and beast in ways words never could. Lena watched from a few paces back, her veterinarian's kit open at her feet, instruments glinting like hesitant promises. She adjusted the drip line on the makeshift setup for the kitten, her hands steady, but her eyes betraying the storm within. In the city clinics, she'd once turned away a stray dog, too overwhelmed by cases with paying owners, the regret lingering like a shadow. Willow Creek had been her redemption, a place to atone through quiet acts. But Raja's gaze pulled at her deeper. The tiger's labored breaths came in rhythm with the kitten's, a duet of survival that made her throat tighten. "He's responding," she said softly, more to the air than to Elias, her voice barely rising above the wind's low moan. The kitten had settled into the box, its body curling toward the fence, tiny paws kneading the towel, as if dreaming of milk and safety. Raja's chuff repeated softer now, a vibration that hummed through the metal and into the ground. Tom paced a short distance away, his boots thudding against the earth like unspoken doubts. He rubbed his stubbled jaw, eyes flicking between the tiger and the group, his broad frame a barrier of practicality. "This is fool's gold," he muttered, voice gravel rough from years of shouting over chainsaws and truck engines. "Tiger's been silent for a reason. Pain's got him locked up, and now we're playing matchmaker with a half-dead kitten. One swipe, and it's over." His words carried the weight of fear, the kind born from close calls in the wild, where compassion could turn to catastrophe. Mia, hovering nearby with her notebook forgotten in her lap, shook her head, her young face flushed against the cold. She'd come to the sanctuary to escape the city's indifference, where her own family's dismissal of her dreams had left scars as deep as any animal's wound. "It's not playing," she whispered, her breath visible and quick. "Look at him, he's protecting it." The tiger's eyes, amber pools reflecting the pale sky, seemed to hold a silent judgment, weighing their worth against his trust. Elias ignored the debate, his focus narrowing to the space between fence and box. He reached through the wire slowly, gloved fingers extending a scrap of warmed meat toward Raja's paw. The tiger didn't flinch. Instead, he lowered his head further, nostrils flaring at the scent, his massive form casting a shadow that enveloped the scene like a protective veil. The air thickened with the smell of wet fur and thawing earth, undercut by the faint metallic tang of the sanctuary's old iron gates. Elias's hand trembled, not from fear of the tiger, but from the intimacy of the moment, the raw vulnerability of offering solace to a creature who'd known only betrayal. Raja's tongue flicked out, not to take the meat, but to brush the air near the kitten's box, a gesture so gentle it bordered on reverence. The kitten stirred, its mew a fragile thread weaving through the silence, and in that instant, Elias felt the moral suspense coil tighter. To pull back now would be to abandon them both, echoing the helplessness of his daughter's last days. But to press on meant risking the fragile peace, inviting the wildness that slumbered in Raja's depths. Lena stepped forward then, her decision crystallizing in the quiet. "We can't leave him like this," she said, her voice gaining strength as she knelt beside Elias. "The wound's infected. I can see the swelling from here. If we don't intervene, he'll lose the leg, or worse." She unpacked her kit with deliberate care, pulling out antiseptic wipes and a syringe of antibiotics, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind raced through the risks. Field surgery on a white tiger. It was madness, the stuff of headlines and lawsuits, but the kitten's presence had cracked something open in Raja, a willingness that months of coaxing hadn't achieved. Tom snorted, crossing his arms tighter. "You're both crazy. Call the state vets. They've got tranks and teams. This ain't our fight." But his protest rang hollow, his eyes lingering on the tiger's trembling paw, the first admission that fear warred with his own buried empathy. Mia moved closer, her idealism propelling her despite the chill gnawing at her bones. She whispered encouragements to the kitten, her voice a soft melody against the wind, and Raja's ears twitched toward it, the rumble in his chest deepening into something almost like approval. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the enclosure like fingers reaching for connection. Elias nodded to Lena, the choice made in silence. "We'll sedate him lightly, clean the wound through the fence if we have to. For now—" His words were a vow, trembling hands steadying as he prepared the dart. The injection was swift, the needle piercing the air before finding its mark in Raja's flank. The tiger staggered slightly, his eyes half closing, but he didn't roar, only watched, trusting in the face of vulnerability. as Raja slumped gently against the fence, his white coat pooling like spilled moonlight. Lena worked with focused precision, swabbing the scarred leg, while Elias held the kitten close, its warmth a talisman against the unfolding drama. Tom's grumbling faded into the background, replaced by the soft sounds of treatment, the rustle of gauze, the drip of saline, the tiger's even breaths syncing with the tiny ones. Mia's tears fell unchecked now, tracing paths down her cheeks as she witnessed the bond solidify, a silent pact forged in the cold. The emotional turn hit Elias hardest. In saving Raja, he glimpsed redemption, not for the tiger alone, but for the father who'd failed before. The sanctuary's distant highway hummed on, indifferent, but here in this pocket of frost and fur, compassion bloomed from the edge of danger. Hours slipped by in that suspended hush, the group tending to both creatures as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples. Raja stirred under the sedative's haze, his paw shifting to rest nearer the box, the kitten nestling instinctively against the fence as if sleeping between invisible guardians. The air carried the promise of revelation, a deeper truth simmering beneath the surface. Raja's silence hadn't been surrender, but a wait for the right spark to reignite his spirit. Elias's heart ached with the weight of it, knowing the road ahead would test them all, trembling hands and moral crossroads alike. For now, though, the white tiger breathed easier, his hidden depths beginning to unfold. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and compassion can travel. The sedative's haze clung to Raja like the evening mist rolling in from the hills, softening the edges of his massive form as he lay slumped against the fence. His white coat, dusted with flecks of frost that hadn't fully melted, rose and fell in shallow rhythms, each breath a labored whisper against the chain link. Elias knelt nearby, the kitten's box balanced on his knee, its tiny body now curled into a tight ball, paws tucked under, as if drawing warmth from the invisible barrier. The air had grown heavier with the approach of night, carrying the sharp scent of pine sap and the faint, acrid tang of antiseptic from Lena's kit. Distant highway lights flickered like hesitant stars, their glow barely piercing the sanctuary's veil, a reminder that Willow Creek's isolation was both sanctuary and cage. Lena wiped her brow with the back of her hand, the swipe leaving a streak of sweat and grime across her forehead. The wound on Raja's leg was worse than she'd feared, swollen tissue pulsing faintly under the skin, infection threading through like hidden roots. She'd cleaned what she could through the fence's gaps, her fingers threading needles and swabs, with the precision of someone who'd long ago learned to steady her hands against chaos. But the tiger's size complicated everything. The antibiotics would need time to work, and without proper imaging, she couldn't rule out deeper damage from the old trap. Her breath came in measured puffs, visible in the cooling air, as she packed away her tools. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft rustle of Mia shifting her weight, her eyes fixed on the kitten with a mix of awe and fear. Tom had retreated to the ranger station earlier, his gruff mutterings about protocols fading into the wind, but his absence left a void filled with unspoken doubts. Elias felt it keenly, the moral weight pressing down like the encroaching dark. He adjusted the blanket over the kitten, its faint mews now steadier, a fragile counterpoint to Raja's deeper exhales. The tiger's amber eyes, half-lidded under the drug's influence, tracked the movement, a subtle flick of his ear betraying the awareness that lingered beneath. Elias's own hands trembled as he traced the box's edge, the calluses on his palms rough from years of fences and feeds, but now they shook with the echo of old failures. Sophie's room had been sterile, filled with beeps and whispers, her final breath slipping away while he stood frozen, hands clenched at his sides. Here the choice was visceral, immediate, a living plea in fur and eyes that demanded he act. As the sun dipped fully below the horizon, casting the enclosure in twilight's bruise, Tension coiled anew. Raja stirred, a low groan rumbling from his chest, not pain exactly, but a protest against the vulnerability the sedative imposed. His paw twitched, scraping lightly against the wire, and the kitten responded with a tiny stretch, its head turning toward the sound. Lena rose, her joints aching from the prolonged kneel, and scanned the tiger's flank. "He's coming around too soon," she said quietly, her voice threading the silence like a needle. The dose had been conservative, meant to avoid full immobilization, but the infection's fever might be burning through it faster. She glanced at Elias, her sharp eyes softening with shared resolve. "We need to monitor him overnight. If the swelling doesn't go down, we'll have to trank him deeper tomorrow, get him into the holding pen for a full exam." Mia nodded, her notebook clutched forgotten against her chest, pages fluttering in the breeze. She'd seen enough in her short time at the sanctuary to know that nights like this tested more than endurance. They peeled back layers of self-doubt. Her own past flickered in her mind, nights spent arguing with her father over her foolish passion for wildlife, his voice dismissing her dreams as childish whims. Now, watching the tiger's labored rise, she felt a quiet defiance bloom, her hands steadying as she fetched a fresh water bowl from the supply cart. The slosh of liquid echoed softly, a small act of care in the gathering gloom. Elias didn't respond immediately, his gaze locked on Raja as the tiger lifted his head, nostrils flaring to draw in the kitten's scent once more. The white fur along his neck bristled slightly, not in threat, but in a protective instinct that made the air feel charged. The sanctuary's floodlights hummed to life automatically, bathing the scene in harsh yellow, shadows lengthening like accusations. Elias's heart quickened. He'd faced down charging deer and snarling wolves in his years as ranger, but this was different. A silent negotiation with a creature whose pain mirrored his own buried grief. "He trusts us," he murmured finally, the words more breath than speech, as he slid the box closer to the fence. The kitten stirred again, its paw extending through the wire's gap, brushing against Raja's massive one, in a touch so delicate it seemed the world held its breath. But the moment shattered with Raja's sudden stagger. The tiger lurched forward, his injured leg buckling under the effort, a sharp intake of breath escaping him, a sound raw and involuntary, the first true break in his year-long hush. Lena lunged, her kit spilling open as she grabbed a stethoscope, pressing it to the fence while Elias steadied the box. The tiger's sides heaved, fever-glazed eyes widening, and for an instant, panic flashed in their depths, not fear of them, but of the weakness overtaking him. Mia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, tears welling as the reality hit. This wasn't just treatment, it was a race against collapse. Tom's earlier warnings echoed in the silence, his pragmatic fear now a shadow over their compassion. "Hold on," Lena whispered, her voice cracking for the first time as she prepared another dose. "We're not leaving you." Elias's trembling hands fumbled with the dart gun, the metal cold against his skin, but he steadied, sighting carefully. The shot whispered through the air, finding its mark, and Raja slumped once more, his body curling protectively around the fence's base, paw inches from the kitten. The little creature mewed softly, nestling closer to the wire, as if sleeping between the tiger's paws, oblivious to the drama. In that fragile peace, Elias felt the emotional turn deepen, a redemption not in grand gestures, but in this quiet vigil, where human frailty met animal resilience. Lena sat back on her heels, breath hitching, her own regrets surfacing, the stray she'd once ignored, its eyes pleading from an alley, a choice that had haunted her drive to Willow Creek. The night deepened, stars pricking the velvet sky above the barren oaks, their light cold and distant. The group settled into watches. The ranger station's glow, a beacon against the dark. Raja's breaths evened, The kitten's warmth a bridge across the divide, but tension lingered like the frost's return. Medical crisis loomed. Tomorrow's exam could reveal fractures too deep to mend without risking everything. Elias leaned against the fence, eyes on the sleeping forms, the weight of revelation building. In Raja's silence, broken now by instinct's call, lay a hidden truth. The tiger hadn't withdrawn from the world. He'd been waiting for a connection to pull him back, forcing them all to confront the kindness they owed the misunderstood. Hours passed in hushed vigil, the wind whispering through the pines like secrets untold. Mia dozed fitfully by the box, her idealism a quiet flame. Lena monitored vitals through the night, her hands no longer trembling but marked by the night's toll. Elias remained, the highway's rumble a distant lullaby, his thoughts turning inward. Saving Raja wasn't just about the tiger, it was about reclaiming the father he'd lost, one compassionate act at a time. As dawn's first light crept over the hills, painting the white fur in soft gold, the bond held, a silent promise amid the rising suspense, where fear and hope intertwined like vines on the fence. Dawn's pale light filtered through the sanctuary's chain link like threads of forgotten silk, casting elongated shadows across the frost-laced ground. Raja lay still against the fence, his white coat absorbing the chill as his breaths deepened into a steady cadence, the sedative holding him in its merciful grasp. The kitten, nestled in the box mere inches away, mirrored his rhythm, its tiny chest rising and falling in unwitting harmony, paws occasionally twitching as if dreaming of warmer dens. Elias sat cross-legged on the thawing earth, his back against a weathered post, the night's vigil etching deeper lines into his weathered face. His hands, still bearing the faint tremor of adrenaline's fade, rested on his knees, calluses cracked from the cold. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp pine and lingering antiseptic, undercut by the earthy musk of the tiger's fur, a reminder that life persisted, fragile and fierce, in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. Lena moved with the precision of someone who knew the edge of desperation all too well, her kit spread open on a tarp nearby. She'd barely slept, her sharp eyes rimmed with fatigue, as she checked Raja's vitals through the fence's gaps. The stethoscope's cold bell pressing against the wire, the infection had burrowed deep. Her earlier swabs revealing pus-tinged fluid that spoke of neglect's toll, the sanctuary's underfunding, a silent accomplice to the tiger's suffering. "Pulse is stabilizing," she murmured, her voice a low thread in the morning hush, more for her own reassurance than the others. But the swelling in his leg persisted, hot to the touch even through her glove, a throbbing pulse that demanded more than makeshift care. Field surgery loomed as the only path forward, a decision that twisted her gut with the weight of risk. One wrong incision, and the white tiger's silence could become eternal. Mia stirred from her spot by the ranger station door, rubbing sleep from her eyes as she approached with a thermos of steaming coffee, the aroma cutting through the crisp air like a tentative warmth. Her idealism had carried her through the night, but now doubt flickered in her gaze, her young hands clutching the container as if it anchored her. Tom had returned at first light, his truck's engine coughing to life in the distance before he lumbered over, overalls dusted with hay from an early feed run. He said nothing at first, his broad frame casting a shadow over the scene. But his eyes, usually narrowed in skepticism, softened imperceptibly at the sight of the kitten's peaceful form. "State's on their way," he grunted finally, breaking the silence with reluctant pragmatism. "Heard the call go out last night, but if we're doing this now—" His words trailed off, a concession wrapped in gruffness, his moral stance cracking under the evidence of the bond unfolding before him. Elias nodded, rising slowly, joints protesting the night's immobility. The highway's distant rumble grew audible as traffic stirred. semis slicing through the fog like indifferent spectres, their horns faint echoes of a world that moved on without pause. He glanced at Raja, the tiger's amber eyes half open now, glazed but aware, locking onto the kitten with a vigilance that pierced the sedative's fog. In that gaze, Elias saw fragments of his own loss. Sophie's trusting eyes in her crib, reaching for a father too broken to fully respond. The emotional pull tightened, a knot in his chest, urging him toward the redemption that had eluded him for years. "We can't wait," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. "Get the enclosure ready. Lena, you'll need space." The rising tension built like the wind gathering in the oaks, leaves whispering warnings as the group mobilized. They worked in near silence, Tom's heavy steps hauling barriers into place, while Mia fetched restraints and warming blankets, her breaths quickening with each task. Lena prepared the surgical field, her hands steadying over the tools, scalpel, sutures, irrigation syringe, laid out on sterile drapes. The fence's confines limited them. They'd have to work through reinforced gaps, sedating Raja just enough to immobilize without fully compromising his instincts. Raja sensed the shift, his body tensing subtly, a low rumble vibrating through the ground, not threat, but unease, his paw inching closer to the kitten's box as if to shield it from the intrusion. As Lena administered the deeper tranquilizer, the dart's whisper cutting the air, Elias held the kitten close, its warmth a talisman against the unfolding peril. The little creature mewed softly, nuzzling his glove, oblivious to the gravity pressing down. Raja's massive form slackened, his head lolling against the wire, white fur spilling like untamed snow. Lena began, her breath hitching as she incised the swollen flesh, the scent of infection sharp and metallic in the morning air. Blood welled minimally, controlled with pressure, but the depth revealed fragments of bone, scarred by the old trap, jagged remnants that had festered unchecked. Her hands trembled now, not from cold, but the precision required, each stitch a bridge between survival and loss. "It's bad," she whispered, sweat beading on her brow despite the chill, shrapnel from the trap. "It's been grinding in there all this time." Mia hovered at the edge, her face pale, tears held back as she monitored the tiger's breathing. The rise and fall syncing with the kitten's, in the box Elias now placed nearer. Tom's assistance came grudgingly, holding the light steady, his gruff exterior masking the fear that clawed at him, fear of failure, of the wild reclaiming what humans had caged. The sanctuary's isolation amplified every sound, the snip of scissors, the drip of saline, Raja's faint exhale through the haze. Elias watched, his own hands clenched, the moral suspense coiling like the fog at their feet. This act, risking everything for a silent beast, mirrored the choices he'd evaded in his grief, forcing him to confront the man he'd become. Not the distant father, but a rescuer, trembling yet resolute, the procedure stretched into an eternity of hushed intensity, the sun climbing to warm the frost, but not the knot of dread in their chests. Lena sutured the deepest wound, extracting a shard of metal that glinted cruelly in the light, a poacher's legacy, small but devastating. Raja stirred midway, his eyes fluttering, a weak chuff escaping as the kitten's scent reached him, grounding him through the pain. The bond held, fragile as the thread she tied off, and in that moment, the emotional turn deepened for them all. Lena's regrets surfaced in the quiet, the alley stray's eyes, now overlaid with Raja's pleading gaze, pushing her toward atonement. Mia whispered encouragements, her voice a soft anchor, while Tom's silence spoke of his own hidden scars, perhaps a lost pet from childhood farm days, long buried under layers of toughness. As Lena finished, bandaging the leg with careful wraps, exhaustion settled like the retreating mist. Raja's breaths evened, the infection's fire dimmed for now, but the crisis lingered, a delicate balance until full recovery. Elias replaced the kitten in its box, sliding it through a secure gap so it rested just beyond the tiger's paw, the tiny form curling as if sleeping between invisible guardians. Raja's massive pad shifted in response, brushing the wire gently, a silent vow of protection. The group stepped back, the air thick with relief and unspoken fears, the highway's hum a counterpoint to their hushed world. In the quiet aftermath, as the oaks rustled with the first breeze, a deeper truth began to surface. Elias knelt once more, his hand near the fence, and Raja's eyes met his, not with wildness but recognition, as if the tiger sensed the shared sorrow, the hidden pain that had silenced them both. The white tiger's presence, majestic even in vulnerability, reframed the morning. His year of quiet hadn't been defeat but a profound waiting, revealed now through this tiny life. Trembling hands steadied, tears held back no longer, as compassion forged its path from danger's edge, pulling them toward the redemption that lay ahead. The sanctuary breathed with them, a living testament to instincts unbroken, and in Raja's watchful gaze, the promise of hope flickered brighter against the cold. The mid-morning light slanted through the sanctuary's chain link, gilding the edges of Raja's white fur like fragile frost on a forgotten windowpane. Elias remained kneeling, his hand hovering near the fence, the rough weave of the wire imprinting patterns on his palm, as if marking him with the tiger's silent claim. Raja's amber eyes held his, unblinking, a depth there that pierced beyond the haze of sedation, a knowing that stirred the air between them, heavy with the scent of fresh bandages and thawing earth. The kitten, oblivious in its box, let out a soft sigh, its tiny body shifting closer to the barrier, paws splaying against the cold metal as if reaching for the warmth of the massive paw just beyond. The oaks overhead rustled faintly, their branches skeletal against the pale sky, whispering of winds that carried secrets from the distant highway, where engines droned like indifferent heartbeats. Lena stepped back from her tools, wiping her hands on a sterile cloth, the fabric absorbing traces of the morning's urgency. Her breath came in measured draws, visible puffs that mingled with the mist rising from the ground, her sharp features softened by exhaustion and a quiet awe. The surgery had bought time, extracting that cruel shard of metal, but the infection's roots ran deeper, threading through muscle and bone like hidden veins of doubt. She glanced at the group, Tom standing sentinel with arms crossed, his broad shoulders a wall against the encroaching chill, Mia hovering with the thermos, her eyes wide and glistening, notebook abandoned in the grass. Silence enveloped them, thicker than the fog, broken only by the soft drip of condensation from the fence posts, each drop a reminder of fragility. Elias felt the pull intensify, Raja's gaze drawing forth fragments of memory he'd sealed away. Sophie's laughter echoing in the empty house after her passing, the way her small hand had sought his in fevered dreams, only to slip away. The tiger's silence mirrored that void, a year of withdrawal born not from defeat, but from wounds too profound for roars. Now, with the kitten's presence bridging the divide, something shifted in Raja. A subtle lift of his head, nostrils flaring to catch the mingled scents of milk and fur, his bandaged leg twitching faintly under the wraps. Elias's throat tightened, tears blurring the white form before him, not from sorrow alone, but from the raw edge of recognition. The white tiger wasn't just enduring, he was revealing a hidden layer, instinct awakening to protect what had found him in his isolation. Tom broke the hush first, his voice gravel-low, laced with the reluctance of a man who'd buried too many strays on the farmstead edges. He's stable for now, but that leg, it'll need watching. Fever could spike by nightfall. He shifted his weight, boots scraping the gravel, his eyes avoiding Raja's as if fearing the judgment in those amber depths. Pragmatism warred with the scene. His fear of the wild, a close call with a cornered coyote years back, leaving scars on his arm, clashing against the quiet plea unfolding. Mia knelt beside the box, her fingers gently stroking the kitten's ear, her breath hitching as the tiny creature purred, a vibration that seemed to echo through the fence to Raja. Her own past surfaced in whispers, dismissed dreams, a father's cold dismissal of her sketches of endangered beasts, now reframed by this bond. "He's changed," she murmured, voice barely audible over the wind. The silence. "It's breaking." The tension rose with the sun, the sanctuary's paths gleaming slick under melting frost, each step toward the enclosures a measured risk. Lena monitored Raja closely, her stethoscope cold against the wire, listening to the tiger's heart, a steady thrum that quickened at the kitten's stirrings, but as midday crested, crisis edged in. Raja's breaths grew ragged, the bandaged legs swelling anew, heat radiating through the fabric like a buried fire. Infection fought back, fever glazing his eyes, his massive body shifting restlessly against the fence. The kitten sensed it, mewling sharper, paws pressing insistently as if urging the guardian to rise. Elias's hands trembled as he fetched ice packs from the station, the chill biting his skin, mirroring the dread coiling in his gut. This wasn't just recovery. It was a dramatic extraction from the brink, demanding they breach the enclosure's safety for closer intervention. Lena's decision crystallized in the mounting hush. "We have to move him," she said, her voice steady but edged with the weight of it, hands already gathering restraints and a portable hoist scavenged from the supply shed. The process unfolded in slow, cinematic tension, Tom reinforcing the barriers with heavy chains, his grunts echoing like reluctant oaths. Mia preparing a warmed crate for the kitten, her tears silent, tracks down her cheeks. Elias approached the gate, keyring jingling softly, his heart pounding against his ribs as he unlocked the mechanism, the creak of metal a-thunder in the quiet. Raja watched, body tensing, a low rumble building in his chest, not threat, but a vulnerable plea, his paw scraping the ground toward the box. They entered as a unit, breaths synchronized in the charged air, the scent of musk and medicine thick. Raja allowed the approach. His eyes fixed on the kitten Elias carried, the tiny form nestled against his chest like a living shield. The hoist lifted the tiger gently, his white coat rippling under the strain, labored exhales fogging the space as they maneuvered him to the holding pen, a reinforced space with soft bedding and monitoring lines. Lena worked swiftly there, rebandaging and administering fluids, her hands no longer shaking, but marked by the intimacy of the task. Raja's fever broke in waves, sweat matting his fur, but the kitten's proximity, placed in a secure alcove within reach, grounded him, its purr a soothing counterpoint to the struggle. In the pen's dim light, as shadows lengthened from the oaks, the late revelation unfolded. Elias knelt by Raja's side, the tiger's head turning toward him, nostrils brushing his sleeve. A scent caught, faint, familiar. The same cologne Elias had worn in the hospital rooms with Sophie, a quiet constant through grief. Raja's eyes softened further, a chuff escaping, deeper now, as if recognizing the shared silence of loss. Elias froze, breath catching. The tiger had been confiscated as a cub from that same roadside zoo where, years prior, he'd visited with Sophie, her tiny hand pressing against the glass, eyes wide at the white blur within. The poacher's trap that scarred Raja, it echoed the illness that stole her, both born of human indifference. The truth reframed everything. Raja's year of quiet hadn't been isolation, but a mirrored mourning, waiting for a connection to heal the hidden wounds. Tears fell unchecked now, Elias's hand resting near the tiger's paw, the kitten sleeping between them in the alcove, a tiny bridge across species and sorrow. The group felt it ripple outward, Lena's regrets dissolving in the tiger's steadying pulse. Mia's idealism affirmed in the purrs. Even Tom's gruff nod, his own buried loss, a brother taken by the wilds, surfacing in quiet acceptance. The sanctuary held its breath, the highway's distant hum fading against the rhythm of recovery, compassion's silent justice emerging from the tiger's gaze. As evening draped the hills in indigo, Raja's breaths eased, the bond solidifying, pulling them toward the horizon of hope. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of this white tiger reach more people who still believe in kindness. The evening light bled into the sanctuary like watered ink, softening the edges of the holding pen where Raja rested, his massive form a pale mound against the straw bedding. The air inside carried the faint, comforting musk of warmed fur and medicinal herbs Lena had infused into the wraps, mingling with the earthy tang of the oaks pressing against the reinforced windows. Ilya sat on a low stool nearby, his hands folded in his lap, fingers still bearing the faint imprint of the fence's weave, a tactile echo of the barriers they'd begun to dissolve. The kitten, transferred to a secure alcove within arm's reach of the tiger, slept curled in a nest of flannel, its breaths a soft counterpoint to Raja's deeper, steadying inhales. The revelation hung in the dimness like suspended dust motes, refracting the day's light into something almost sacred, the shared scent of loss, the mirrored silences that had bound man and beast across years of unspoken grief. Lena moved quietly, checking the IV line one last time, her steps muffled on the padded floor. Fatigue etched her features, but her eyes held a clarity born of the afternoon's trials, the shard's extraction, the fever's retreat, the way Raja's body had yielded not to force, but to the kitten's insistent nearness. She'd seen animals fight through pain before, but this was different. Instinct woven with recognition, the tiger's paw extending in the haze of sedation to brush the alcove's edge, as if claiming the tiny life as his own. Her own hands, steady now, traced the bandage, feeling the heat ebb like a tide pulling back from shore. Silence wrapped them, broken only by the distant creak of the sanctuary gates settling in the wind, a sound that carried the weight of choices made and regrets shed. Mia lingered by the door, her silhouette framed against the indigo sky. Thermos long emptied but clutched like a talisman. Tears had dried on her cheeks, leaving salt tracks that caught the low lamp's glow, her idealism tempered now into something resilient, forged in the quiet hours of vigil. The bond before her, the kitten's paw twitching toward Raja's in sleep, mirrored the connections she'd craved, the family validations long denied. Tom stood outside, his broad back to the pen's window, staring into the gathering dusk as if weighing the horizon's indifference. His gruff silence spoke volumes. The earlier protests dissolved into acceptance. The tiger's chuff during recovery, soft and resonant, had cracked his pragmatic shell, unearthing a boyhood memory of nursing a wounded fox back to the wild, a secret act of kindness buried under decades of hardened routine. As night deepened, tension lingered in subtle waves. Raja's leg throbbed faintly under the wraps, a reminder that healing was no straight path, but a slow unraveling of scars. Elias rose, joints aching from the stool, and approached the alcove, his breath fogging the air as he adjusted the kitten's blanket. The little creature stirred, eyes blinking open to milky slits, its mew a fragile thread that pulled Raja's head upright. The tiger's amber gaze, clearer now without fever's glaze, fixed on Elias with an intensity that stripped away pretense. In that look, the deeper truth solidified, not just the shared scent of hospital corridors and zoo glass, but the profound parallel of waiting. Raja's year of hush, a vigil for trust lost to poachers' traps, Elias's grief, a silence imposed by a daughter's absence. The white tiger extended his paw fully, pads brushing the alcove's barrier, and the kitten responded, scrambling closer until it nestled against the wire, as if sleeping between the great paws of a guardian long denied. Elias's chest tightened, tears welling unbidden as he knelt, his hand mirroring the gesture, fingers splaying near Raja's through the divide. No words passed. None were needed. The sanctuary's hush amplified the moment. The wind outside carrying faint echoes of highway tires on frost-damp asphalt. A world rushing past without pause. Lena joined them, her presence a quiet anchor, while Mia slipped inside, her breath hitching at the scene. Even Tom turned from the window, his shadow falling across the floor like reluctant benediction. Compassion, born from the edge of fear, bloomed in that enclosed space. Not as triumph, but as a slow awakening, forcing each to confront the morality of their hesitations, Tom's fear of the wild, Lena's shadowed regrets, Mia's untested hopes, Elias's buried fatherhood. Hours blurred into the night's embrace, the group rotating watches as Raja's strength returned in increments, his breaths deepening, the rumble in his chest evolving from plea to contentment. The kitten thrived under their care, its fur fluffing with warmth, Muse turning playful as it batted at shadows cast by the lamp. By midnight, Lena noted the fever's full retreat, the legs swelling yielding to the antibiotics' quiet siege, yet the emotional core pulsed stronger. In saving the tiger, they'd unearthed their own hidden depths, redemption whispering through the silence like dawn's first light. Raja rose unsteadily at last, testing the bandaged limb with deliberate care, his white coat catching the pen's glow like moonlight on snow. He circled the space once, paw padding softly, then settled by the alcove, the kitten curling against the barrier as if it were the safest den in the world. Dawn crept in with the subtlety of thawing mist, painting the holding pen in soft greys and golds. Elias opened the inner gate, allowing Raja a tentative step into the outer enclosure, the chain link yielding to reinforced paths lined with fresh straw. The tiger moved with majestic caution, limp fading to a mere hitch, his form a symbol of misunderstood strength, fierce yet vulnerable, innocence preserved through survival's forge. The kitten, carried in Mia's gentle arms, was placed in a secure carrier nearby, its eyes following the white blur with instinctive trust. As the sun crested the hills, Raja paused at the enclosure's edge, head lifting to the horizon where barren oaks met endless sky. He chuffed once, deep and resonant, the sound breaking fully the veil of 365 days' silence, a roar held back, now released in quiet affirmation. The group watched from the sidelines, breaths held in collective hush, as Raja turned toward the open vista, the kitten's carrier set just beyond the final barrier. In that symbolic stride, he embodied the themes woven through their ordeal: compassion eclipsing fear, silent connections bridging species, loyalty's instinct guiding hope. Elias felt the weight lift, Sophie's memory no longer a chain, but a light, reframing his path toward the kindness the world still craved. Lena's hands steadied forever, Mia's dreams affirmed, Tom's walls crumbled in the tiger's graceful exit. Raja walked into the horizon, not alone, but with the kitten's presence echoing in his wake, a hidden white tiger revealed, his spirit unbound, carrying the promise of survival and the quiet justice of acts chosen from the heart. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of Silent for 365 days, until a tiny kitten slept between his paws, revealing a hidden white tiger. See you in the next one.